Okay, well, hello. My name is Seth Getz, and I work with Nuvescor. And we work with mergers and acquisition companies. We work with small and medium-sized manufacturing companies that are looking to sell their business, or in some cases are looking to actually grow their business through acquisitions. And we like to go through and talk through some different topics that would be relevant to businesses like this. And so today we brought on to us Amy Wirtz. Now, Amy, okay, so Amy is a rock star in the area of working with businesses and their succession plans. In particular, the area that she is amazing at is working with multi-generational family business situations. And anyone who's been around those knows how amazingly complex and difficult those can be. And so Amy's one of those few people that really embraces the difficulty of this area. And instead of shying away from it and saying, no, I don't go there, I don't work with that, Amy just embraces it and says, yes, let's dig into it, let's work on it, and helps them navigate those potentially treacherous waters of how to navigate family, relationships, emotions all around businesses and running of businesses and stuff like that. So Amy brings a wealth of experience of being a lawyer, of being a business owner, of being a consultant and coach into these situations. So Amy, thank you so much for being with us.
And thank you for having me, Seth. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to your audience and offer whatever suggestions I can for people navigating the complexity and wonderful opportunities of family business.
Yeah. So Amy, you and I talked to a lot of business owners about, and in particular manufacturing business, about what it takes to have this succession plan in place. Because so often as a business owner, we're focused on growing the business, getting the business working. And we've got this vague idea out there of a succession plan, but we've not actually laid it out or done enough thinking about it. So what are some of the steps that we need to take in our thinking and steps we need to take that are practical in the early stages of this, even years before?
Yeah, I think the why of ownership is crucial. So the why of ownership for each generation changes. And so for an entrepreneurial, usually they have a very defined why of ownership. Like they want to create their own identity in an industry. They want to not work for other people. They want freedom. They want to grow something in their community, right? The why of ownership is real defined. When we go to second generation, it's typically they struggle with that. Why are we? And a lot of second generation owners are owners by chance, not by choice. So they're given ownership through inheritance instead of by choice. And most families do it equally instead of having a conversation about, well, who wants in and who doesn't? And how do we do that, right? So the why of ownership is something we need to plan for, that it might transition for each generation and it might look different. The other thing is leadership development. So are we going to have this company led by the same kind of ownership, or will it change? Will it be non-family leaders that will be leading our business? And if we're going to have non-family leaders of our business, we have to get our ownership group ready for that because it looks and feels very different. And the other things we have to get in is, what does our ownership processes transitions look like? So what's our family, right? But what's our ownership processes look like? How is that going to change? Is it going from a couple owning to siblings owning? So lots of couples owning, right? Whether the owners or not, they're still involved. Is it cousins? Is it beyond cousins? Each one of those change how ownership should be structured. Who's in? How do you elect to be in? How do you elect to be out? What kind of structures around it legally, and educational needs to happen around that. And lastly, the governance transitions that occur. We at FB, I'm with the Family Business Consulting Group, and we really believe that you have to support the systems that the businesses are going through. So family business systems support family system, ownership system, leadership and management system, and then hopefully some government systems, because governance is things that support those other systems, right? So an ownership council supports the ownership systems. A family council supports that family system. Board of advisors or board of directors supports that management, leadership, and ownership kind of all together. And they move, those pieces move and evolve at different rates. And And so what I would like to say is a really good succession plan is going to look at the succession of all of those systems. If we only look at ownership, we're going to miss the rest of them. And many of our advisors in today's world also only look at one generation's goals. And so what I'm encouraging people to think about is, as we're looking at how the ownership group changes, we look at not just the current ownership's goals, but the next ownership's goals. Succession should take all that into consideration. So it's more than just a legal document. It's more than a tax plan. And, you know, what does liquidity look like? Because sometimes it doesn't make sense to keep the operating business, right? And that's where your company comes in and you help them sell, right?
Yep.
And then what does that mean for the family system moving forward? And that can mean that they're going to just take money and leave and they're separated and they're just family and they don't have connected wealth anymore. Or it can mean that they're going to take that liquidity event and turn it into a family office where they use collective wealth to even grow more wealth as a family, right? So those are the kind of things I'm talking about with succession plan.
You mentioned something very interesting about the fact that you want to prepare the business and the family ownership family for a non-owner, non-family management team. And that's a shift in thinking for a lot of people, because so many business owners, you talk about first generation, so many business owners, they start the business and the business is them. The business is their identity. The business is, I mean, they can't separate it very easily.
Right.
And so to some extent, they even think about that as they think about the next generation. They apply that same overlay of thinking to them. How do you kind of navigate that with them and the helping them to bridge that gap?
Well, I think we just talked about the reality of how, you know, the business, if I can get the owner to see how much the business has grown in the duration of their ownership time, and then look at the business needs versus what the family human capital has to provide it. It doesn't mean you can't have family working at the company. It just might mean that family isn't qualified to be the CEO or the CFO. They can work there, but they don't have the chops yet to give the business what it needs, right? Or how can we continually harvest wealth from the business instead of having a one-time exit? So sometimes I have, you know, a third generation, and that ownership group below the third generation just has no interest in the industry. I mean, they just don't. I think it happens in manufacturing a lot, quite frankly. I don't have, you know, all the cousins are out doing either their own business or they're out being doctors and lawyers or farmers, whatever it is, and they don't want to be in manufacturing, because honestly, we haven't made manufacturing very attractive in this past generation, right? Hopefully we're going to change that, but we haven't really encouraged people to go into manufacturing. So we're kind of void of people that in the industry right now. And so do we do a one-time liquidation event where the family harvests that money only once? Or do we place a non-family CEO and let them buy a little bit of the stock, or give them as part of their compensation a piece of the stock and ownership, and the family retains the majority, right? And then the family has continual dividend investment income moving forward. And then there's a clause that non-family CEO has to sell that stock back to the family or to the company, right? Depending how we work it. But that allows for continual harvest instead of a one-time harvest. Now, there's a lot of risk involved in that, because you have to have great faith in the non-family member to steward that business to profitability so dividends can happen, right? And you have to train your ownership group and family group to trust a non-family CEO. It's a huge shift.
You know, you talked about breaking apart and looking at the different aspects of ownership, management, family, all those different dynamics, and they all, and multiple generations within the family, all having different competing interests and desires. And I'm often thinking of that first generation making the transition to the second generation, and how much the first generation, we'll call him Ted. Everything is wrapped up in Ted's mind, because in Ted's mind is the ownership, is the management of the company, is the family, because he
did
was
it all.
right. So it was all wrapped up into one. And so for you to come in and help them to actually say, no, let's break this apart. Let's take this and analyze
It's
this.
super tough.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be difficult, because they've got to do that if they can actually do a good job of this transition.
It's fascinating. I have a slide that I walk family ownership groups through and families. And it's like at the beginning, there really isn't any separation in those systems. There's just family and ownership, or management, really family and management. I mean, ownership is like, yeah, we own, but it's two people, who cares, right?
Right.
And then we move to the next stage and it becomes family, ownership, and leadership, because we have non-family members working in the business, and where do they fit, right? And then we have family members that don't work in the business, but maybe owners. That's kind of like the next stage of development, that decision. Do you have to work there to own, or can you own and not work there? That's like, and so that separates the circles out just a little bit more. And then you get into the next stage where the majority of owners don't work there, right?
Yep.
And the group just keeps getting bigger. And ownership gets more diluted, right? Because as the group gets bigger, typically each person's ownership gets smaller. So we have branches that own collectively, the branch might own 33% or 25%, but as it goes down the branch, it keeps getting smaller and smaller. And that's when liquidity and exit and entrance and, all of those things happen. And those families typically start looking at, hey, this one company is not enough to feed us. Let's buy more companies to get the profitability larger. Those are the families you're working with for acquisitions instead of selling.
Right. I had this fascinating conversation on Monday with a business owner, and you actually came to mind as I was having this conversation with it, because it was a business owner who had built a nice business over about 20 years. Very profitable, done well for their family with it, everything like that. And of course, he's getting to the point where he's like, I need to plan my succession. He's got a daughter that is in the business, has been in the business for a couple of years now. And he's of the mindset that she's going to take over the business for him. She's thinking, yes, I want to do that. But he's also heard enough, can I say, horror stories about how the transition goes, that he's like, should I be thinking differently about this? Should I go ahead and have that liquidity event of just go ahead and sell the business and, do that? And so what's the process you would take a person through as they examine that piece of information? Because they're not ready to set up a whole family office. They're not big enough to have a management team yet, but yet they're navigating this step of, do I sell or do I pass it on?
The keeper sell decision matrix.
Right.
Right. And you can't do it with just one generation. That's typically the mistake advisors make.
Okay. So in other words, they meet with the owner, the current owner, and they try to make a decision with them and have them make a decision without involving the next generation.
So the difference is that the decision lies with the owner, but the owner needs to know the interest level and the capabilities of the next generation and timing. So we often talk about, is there a generational gap? Right? So we have an owner that wants to succeed to the next generation. You have a willing next generation, but the owner that wants out from the leadership, right? So it's really the running of it more than ownership, the running of it. And we separate those two things. It's really important for most owners to understand that you can pass on leadership and not ownership, or you can pass on ownership and not leadership. First generation owners struggle with that, right? But what we talk about is we segregate those things out, and we talk about the benefits of an intergenerational transfer from an ownership standpoint. And we separate that out, and we talk about why that wants to happen or what it could look like. And we want both sides. And then we look at the same thing from leadership standpoint. And lots of times there's a generational age gap on leadership. So if the next gen wants to lead, but they don't have the skills yet, is there somebody in management that can be an interim or a bridge CEO? While this generation, the leading generation, wants out and wants to go play and just get money. And the next generation skills up to becoming somebody that can actually run the company.
Okay, fascinating. And that's a difficult conversation to have with them.
It's fun. I mean, yes, it's dynamic, but it's fun. And at FBCG, we have 30 years of experience of having these conversations with over 3,000 families. And we share those things with each other, and we have tools and techniques. And yes, it is difficult, but it is doable.
Gotcha. There's something that we talk about a lot more in the last 10 years, and we've got articles written about it, about company culture and the importance of company culture and how much of an impact that has on the business.
And the value of the business.
And the value of the business, because
yeah.
I mean, really customers buy from a company, not just because of their capabilities, but because of culture. And we know how difficult it is to keep and to attract and maintain a team. And we know that teams stick around not just because of payroll or what their salary is, but because of a healthy culture. And business owners know this intuitively because they've built this culture, and they've struggled with oftentimes building this culture over time. And so this business is their baby. It's something they've developed, that culture, so cautiously. How do you help them to maintain that culture through a transition, either a liquidity event of selling the business or to the next generation? How do you maintain that culture?
Well, so I think maintaining the culture, what we try to work through is, what are the core elements of your culture that you hope never change? Because culture always changes. Culture is part of an organizational system. And when a leader leaves an organizational system, it will feel different. And to say that it's going to stay the same is baloney. What we talk about is, what are the core elements of the culture that you want to hand down from generation to generation of ownership, leadership, and family. And every generation will put a little bit different spin, but the meaning is defined. Like here it might be excellent customer service. It might be supply chain perfection. It might be quality, right? We want less than 10% returns on what we're producing, right? Those for business, right? Then the family, it might be, we are always going to create a company that will support our community by giving back 3% of our proceeds to our community. It might be, we will always have a continuously learning culture within our family. We will always support our family members continually getting educated, whatever that is, right? So those core elements will always be the same. What they're educated on might change generation to generation, and in the business, excellent customer service might look a little bit different. What used to be a phone call and an in-person visit might now be delivering the product virtually through virtual walkthroughs and videos and Zoom. I mean, see what I'm saying? So the what might not change, the how changes. And it changes when leaders change. It changes when owners change. It changes with new technologies being introduced. So I really work hard on saying, what are the core things we want to preserve, knowing evolution will never stop?
The touchstones, the things that you come back to and say, are we still there? Are we still doing the basic core?
How do we measure our success?
Yep. Yep. That's brilliant. That would be so crucial. And it's again, extremely important, because it is important to them, because they've developed this over 20, 40, 50 years. Can you give an example of a company where they've done this successfully, where they've kept this example, either a company we know, we might recognize, or just a company that you've worked with where they've kept the culture in a very successful way?
So I don't personally work with them, but our company works with them. They're called Hussey Seats, and they're out of the Boston area. They've been in business for over 120 years now. And Hussey Seats make seats. They started with wagon seats.
Mhm.
And they now make seating for concert venues and music halls and museums, right? So the product is the same, seating. The venue it's delivered in has changed. I think they're in their 5th or 6th generation. They have evolved into having family council meetings where they meet twice a year and they work on their family stated values, which have stayed very consistent. Their core values have stayed very consistent generation after generation after generation.
Hmm.
Their core values in their business has changed, has not changed. Their 3 core values have been, according to their family council president, been very consistent, right? Quality service, connectivity to the community. I mean, just very, very consistent. But how they own, who owns, and what they own has changed over that 120 years. They are very successful because their core values have stayed
Mhm.
the same.
Mhm.
What they deliver has not. Their core values have stayed very much the same, right?
Adapt, evolve, shift with what's going on in the situation, but their
Mhm.
core values remains there, and it works for them as both
Mhm.
a business and a family group that works.
Another story is Lodge cookware. Do you guys know the cast iron cookware
Oh,
that we
yes, yes,
use,
yes.
like
Yep.
campfire cookware? So that family has over 200 shareholders in it. It's that old. It's old.
Mhm.
So what has never changed is they meet once a year in the town that that company was founded in. And they meet at the farmhouse that their, I think, great-grandparents now own. And they have a family retreat at the homestead every year.
Hmm.
Everybody that comes can come, and they tell old stories, and they do a river raft race where you make your rafts down the river and you float. And it goes back to humble roots. It keeps the history of the family alive. They do have a family council, which is like to keep the family history, values, and mission and the why of ownership alive, right, in the education process. But they translate that to their company. Now, their products actually haven't changed that much. They've expanded, but what they do has not changed. How they deliver it and the purpose and the why has stayed consistent.
Hmm. That's awesome. That's really awesome. What is it, something that you would say? I'll give you two different
Mhm.
situations here. But I'm wondering what you would say to them for what their next steps or the next things that they should be thinking about need to be, both for that single owner who's deliberating on liquidity event versus family. How do I navigate this whole thing? And the next is to an already existing family slash management group that's already got family involved in it
Involved.
multiple
Mhm.
generations.
So
What's the first thing they need to be doing?
I think for the entrepreneur, the question I always ask the entrepreneur that's facing keep or sell, what is the legacy you want to give or to foster for the next generation? Is it the retention of your dream or opportunities for their dreams?
Wow, that's a great question. That's amazing. Okay, yep.
Because the business can be continuing only because it's that entrepreneur's dream, and there is an obligation from the next generation to keep the father or mother alive and present by keeping the business alive and present. And they're doing it out of, I don't know what else I'd do with my life. I get paid here more than I ever would anywhere else. And I'm doing it because it's dad or mom's dream.
Mm-hmm.
Those are okay reasons, but it's highly unlikely that the next generation is going to soar with that business if that's why they're doing it, right? They could, but it's less. If instead it's that next generation's dream to grow that business and they have a defined path and the why that they want to own that business and they want to take it and make it theirs and they want to put an imprint on it, then it's a lot more likely it's going to be successful. If there's very little interest in it and they get it because dad dies, and that's why they own it, you're really creating a disaster.
Mm.
And instead, you're better off liquidating that business, taking that money, investing it, and then using that money for your end of your life, but also to open entrepreneurial opportunities for that next generation that might be totally separate from yours. Maybe what you've done is just created a bunch of really cool entrepreneurs. They're going to go out and do what you did on their own.
Mhm.
And
Yes.
then for the management leadership side, make sure that we have a defined strategic plan that people can follow and understand. And we're putting people in seats because they're qualified, not because of family relationships or loyalty.
That's really good. Having something, again, you separated out a little bit the difference between ownership, family, management. So if there's a clear distinction there, and management has got to have the skills for management, and they can still be an owner, they can still be family, but that's different from being a manager and running a business that does that thing. Yep, that's great. But Amy, thank you so much for talking
Oh,
this
you're
stuff.
welcome.
This is some great information, and I think your questions and your thoughts on it are just great. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really, I just want to say to your listeners, Nuvescor is a great company. I have referred them to clients, and they really care about the people they work with, and they treat them with respect, and they guide them with knowledge. And you can't ask for more when you refer a client group or a family group to another business than that.
I appreciate that. And so if someone's listening to this has questions on it, because your questions are good and it's going to provoke some thinking that they need to work through. There's a lot of stuff to work through. How do they reach out to you? What's the best way to reach out to you for questions and to get some input?
Yeah, my email probably is the fastest way. As my kids would tell me, Mom, you're old, you still do email. But that's how I respond to people the most. And it's my last name, Wirtz, WIRTZ, at the FBCG, THE, F as in Frank, B as in boy, C as in cookie, G as in group.com.
Okay, good.
All
Well,
right,
thank you
thank
so
you so
much.
much.